President Biden has, quote, real concerns that Russia may use chemical weapons in Ukraine. European leaders have expressed similar worries. Andy Weber is the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs and currently Senior Fellow at the Council on Strategic Risks. Andy, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mimi.
So how worried are you that Putin could use a chemical weapon in Ukraine?
Oh, I'm deeply concerned. It's within the playbook. They've used them in peacetime in Salisbury, England, in an assassination attempt, and they've been covering up for Syrian use of chemical weapons routinely in recent years.
So what capabilities does Russia currently have in the area of chemical weapons?
Well, they have a whole range of capabilities, so it would depend on the intended targets. They have advanced fourth-generation chemical weapons, like the Novichok agents that were used in England. They have VX, sarin, Soman, many nerve agents. They could even use fentanyl derivatives, as they did in the Moscow theater siege in 2002, where they killed over 100 people because they used too high a dose. So they have a whole range, and they can pick their targets. It could be against leadership, military leaders, political leaders, or it could be to clear buildings, even to kill people underground in shelters. It's a terrible, insidious, disgusting, and banned, prohibited by international convention type of weapon.
So, Andy, chemical weapons do have drawbacks for the bad actors that would use them. Are they really more useful as a threat rather than an actual weapon?
No, they've been used over and over again in Syria to good effect. They terrorize the population. So especially against soft civilian targets, which, since the Russian military is doing so poorly against actual Ukrainian military targets, they seem to be focusing on residential areas and targeting civilians. So this is a weapon of mass destruction that can kill thousands or even tens of thousands of people.
What do you think could tip Putin into making that decision of chemical weapons use?
Well, there's a paradox here. The more the Russian military faces defeat, the more likely they are to resort to these horrible weapons of mass destruction, up to and possibly including nuclear weapons, although I think it's much more likely that they would use chemical weapons. And apparently we have intelligence that they're planning to use chemical weapons, which we have been revealing in an attempt to preempt that use.
So what do you think the appropriate response should be if chemical weapons are used in Ukraine? I mean, what are the options?
Well, I think it would lead to a serious escalation. It would probably draw NATO further into this conflict. But there are things we can do in advance to prevent it and prepare for it. And in that process, reduce the impact. We should be, and I believe we are, as the NATO Secretary General has announced, providing protective equipment, detectors, so we would know about use, as well as medical countermeasures, antidotes, to the Ukrainian military and health officials, so they are prepared to save lives in the event that this terrible taboo is crossed by the Russian Federation.
But what about a response, Andy, if they are used? I mean, what you described was before use, protection, deterrence, but then, I mean, what do you think? What are the options for a response?
Well, obviously, the United States is in compliance with the chemical and biological weapons conventions and has none of these weapons. So that's not a possibility. There are other things we can do to increase our military support, the level of sophistication of equipment that we're providing. And such a horrible, horrible act by President Putin could make us change our policy of staying out of direct involvement in this conflict.
You know, the State Department has said that Russia may be spreading misinformation, that the U.S. has chem bio weapons labs in Ukraine. What's the purpose of spreading that kind of information?
Well, that's the big lie. It's not new. They've been spreading this information for well over 10 years. These falsehoods have several intended purposes. One is to cause confusion, perhaps, and most concerning is they're preparing for a so-called false flag attack where they will blame the use of chemical weapons on Ukraine, which has no chemical weapons, much the way that President Assad in Syria, every time he uses them against his people, he blames it on the opposition.
And finally, Andy, does the U.S. still have any chemical weapons, or have they all been destroyed?
We are on the tail end of destroying our Cold War arsenal under OPCW, Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, supervision. We're down to the last few, but they have been taken off of military potential use for decades.
All right. Well, Andy, I want to thank you for being on the program, and let's hope we don't have to talk about this subject again.
Well, let's hope not. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.